Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, Director of Programming here at the Green Film Festival of San Francisco. Um, you know, many people, when they think of green film festivals, they often think of like documentaries and things. But we like to kind of think of it in a better way in the sense that, we think about, the environment of the world we live in. And so when we run across really neat narrative fiction films that kind of align with our mission and our values, we love to show them. And you just had a chance to see the really wonderful film Outdoor School. And we're lucky enough to have Afani Bell here. Welcome, Afani.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And I heard you had mentioned in our kind of like before we kind of jumped on the Q&A, I guess you lived in the Bay Area for a while.
Yeah,
And now,
lived in the Bay. Yep, Ventura over when Dogpatch was just becoming a thing. I used to work for KQED, doing some education media stuff for them.
very cool. Well, it's kind of neat to see your all's vision, Portland in the Northwest and kind of sharing this film. Can you tell us a little bit about, how was it that you knew you kind of wanted to, kind of transform the story into a film, and like what was that kind of process like of kind of getting things ready to create?
Yeah, it was a really interesting sort of story, how the film came about. Interestingly enough, the subject of the film, Vin Chambry, was and is a very good friend of mine. And Ime, the director of the film, was also a good friend of mine, but we didn't know each other. I started a company called Brushfire Creative Partners, which was a small production media production house here in Portland, now defunct. Oh, it's still kind of out there doing some things, but quiet. But I met Ime through a different initiative, and we sort of realized that we had known each other and been around in the same circles for a long time, but that often because my name is Nigerian and he is also actually Nigerian, and they both begin with an I, and we both work in film, people would often confuse us for each other. um, Although I'm very tall and he's a little bit shorter, but it doesn't matter. The point is, as we had developed a friendship, we started to develop a business relationship, and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do. If there was a film we wanted to make, I had some ideas. He was throwing around some ideas, but we didn't quite settle on anything. And then one day he came to me. He said, "I met this this guy, and he's got an amazing story. He told me like, he was homeless and he was living outdoors for a long time, and he went to outdoor school, and he started telling me the story of that would eventually sort of become the film, and because the film is based on a true story. And then I said to him, that sounds familiar. Is that Vin Chambry? And he was like, yeah. He's like, you know Vin? I'm like, yeah, I know Vin. And Vin is the kind of guy who his lived experience is so incredible, not just through this story that we tell in Outdoor School. I mean, he's been on Broadway. He's played college Division I football. He has this sort of he's kind of a person who's like a jack of all trades. But I think it all comes from sort of this formative experience that he had as a young child. But he's gone on to sort of have all these different intersections in his life that are amazing. And this element of his early childhood is just one of them. And so I knew him in a different sort of context. And so, when he told me about this film and this idea that he wanted to sort of tell this, true to life story, I was like, absolutely. And so at one point we all got together and kind of, connected the dots. And, from that point on, we knew that was the story that we were going to work on. It kind of all sort of came together. And, Ime has a, more detailed sort of story about how they met first, and, had this really, because they were working on a commercial. I think Ime was directing a commercial. It was like a Doritos commercial, I think. And I think Ime,
Mhm.
as an actor, was cast in that commercial, and that's kind of how they met. So, but we were all sort of living here in the Portland area, and we all went to outdoor school, which is an interesting thing. Like,
Oh,
we've all
wow.
had
Okay.
these very, cyclical, similar experiences as, African American men growing up in the Pacific Northwest. We sort of all had these interesting, connectivities with our own lived experiences. So yeah, it was a strange sort of coalescing of ideas and people and circumstances, and it all sort of came together into this film.
Very cool. Well, so I wasn't aware, I didn't realize that you'd gone to outdoor school. Also, how do you think? I mean, this is kind of a two-pronged question. How do you think that's kind of shaped your kind of trajectory in life, you know? And then how did that personal experience also shape how you wanted to kind of craft the story on screen?
Have this experience where we spend a week out in the outdoors. So it's kind of like this ritualistic kind of experience that, you know, kids, you know, when they're facing that experience at that particular time, you know, they have different reactions to. And my personal reaction was I had two siblings ahead of me who were older. So I watched them sort of go through that process of like packing and getting their sleeping bags and their tents and their, you know, all this stuff that seemed like they were going on these expeditions. And so when it came to be my turn, you know, I was like, I wanted, you know, it was my turn and I was kind of expecting it. It wasn't like a huge surprise. But it definitely like, it wasn't the first time that I had spent, you know, time away from home on my own or, you know, but it was an opportunity to really understand fast of the out and the scope and scale of it. And there are moments when you're sort of, I mean, I'm not sure if how familiar you are with the landscape of Portland, but like Portland is a tiny dot in the middle of, you know, vast wilderness, you know, on all sides. Like I could literally walk for 2 hours and then, you know, be outside of the built environment and be in a place that is wholly natural. Like when we go to outdoor school, we don't drive very far. We get on the bus and you drive maybe 15, 20 minutes and you're in the wilderness. And, you know, the added component of being away from your family and being away from sort of feels isolating and in a challenging way to your youth. Like when you're that young, it's like you feel it more than you see it, like the distance. It's not far, but it feels different. And you feel that in the film as well. I think there's several scenes where, you know, in the sort of beginning of the second act of the film, when you're sort of moving off into, you know, on the bus, like you kids transform. Like you really see this really an emotional experience for kids to be out there. And I had a similar experience when I was young. And so those kind of scenes when we were writing them and putting them together, we were all sort of tapping into that same feeling, which I think the film does a really good job of portraying.
Yeah, it's a really cool film, and was excited to watch it and be able to kind of share with folks. And one of the things you mentioned is that this is inspired by a true story. What sort of challenges come about when you're kind of working with real material to kind of then write a narrative fiction film?
There's a lot, there's a lot of considerations to make. A lot of them, were about, it's about taking someone's life and condensing it into 90 minutes. That's hard. And so making the decision about like what moments to emphasize and which to sort of, for the sake of brevity and for the sake of, sort of staying true to the structure of storytelling, like it's a dance. But I think that we had this really great gift of having Vin, and one of the challenging things about working with Vin, and this is an amazing thing, is that, like I said before, like he has this vast lived experience. So one of the challenges was, as we had sort of figured out what the main story beats were going to go, as we figured out what the touch points were going to be in the script, there's this process where you continually sort of go over it. And if the script is never finished, you're always refining and changing, even up to the moment of filming. Either that's, for better or for worse, you're getting inspired. And, script is just it's a blueprint, but it's not a blueprint that's set in stone. And so before the script was sort of locked to the point where we were prepared to shoot, as when we were writing the film, we all sort of got together. We went out to the coast and we sort of figured out what the story was going to be. We spent a few days just sort of hammering it out. But ever since that moment, we would meet again and talk about the story, and Vin would tell us something that was amazing that we didn't know. That was like, oh, we got to figure out how to fit that in. But his life was so vast, and the experience of what he went through as a child emotionally was so nuanced that it felt like, he was always sort of bearing the lead. um, but I think over the course of between the time that we sort of first started, figuring out the story, and to the time where the writers Ime and Kamalfi sort of, got it down. The most difficult thing was trying to figure out and manage the things that we were learning in between that time. And so there were a bunch of revisions, a bunch of changes, um, but trying to figure out how to distill these sort of poignant, sort of impactful moments was one of the more difficult parts, because there were just so many. One of the sort of guide stones that I think, Kamalfi and Ime did a wonderful job of doing is sort of making sure that, all of the, pivotal moments in Vin's life were anchored to the main themes, right? So obviously there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about, him being on Broadway. We also had this great through line of the Moth, because practically, there was the story that Vin had performed for the Moth, which was sort of where we had a really good template for how the story could go. We kind of used the sort of structure of his own story. So that was really helpful in sort of, keeping things on this track where we wouldn't sort of get distracted by other amazing things that Vin had experienced or gone through. So I think those things were really helpful in, because we already had kind of these templates for what the story was going to be like. But there were a number of things that I think crept in as well that, weren't a part of, some of the characters. There's a few characters that we introduced that weren't a part of the original sort of Moth story. So we had the benefit of being able to use that template to really embellish some of the, I don't want to say embellish, but sort of really adorn some of these other beats in the story with additional sort of emphasis and tone. And I think it really came out pretty well.
Well, very cool. Well, I love how you kind of described the idea that, the script's never really finished, in the sense that you continue to be kind of inspired as you make it. Because I think many that haven't been on a film set and things,
Yeah.
Realize that it, obviously it's a, a kind of ever evolving creature, I guess, even through the editing room. One of the things I always try to remind our audiences is that we're, so lucky that you guys share films like these early on its life with us. And so our role as an audience is that, for the films that resonate with us, to go talk about them, whether it be in the backyard barbecue or over drinks tonight, or and kind of be the grassroots street team to kind of help kind of spread the word of really cool indie films. And so what is the best way to kind of continue to follow the film, and then also kind of continue to follow the other kind of creative endeavors that you guys have going on?
Well, here locally, we have a strong plan to sort of premiere. We haven't had a local premiere here yet because we're still sort of, getting the film out and people seeing it in various different places. And we're still sort of, we have a really cool partner in the film. We do have a plan to sort of work with the Moth to do a couple of different screenings.
Nice.
I think we're also working here locally in Portland to have a sort of traditional screening here at one of our local theaters, which is going to be exciting. But we're also looking to still sort of figure out sort of what our main distribution plan is going to be. I think there's been a lot of really cool interest in the film from a lot of different people that Ime is sort of still sorting through. He's very protective of where he wants the story to go, so to sort of maximize the amount of effort that all the people and the artists have come together to make this film, to make sure that it gets seen. But we have this really cool opportunity because Outdoor School here locally is so beloved. We really have a plan. We want to. Ime is really excited about the opportunity to share it with students.
Okay.
And so working potentially with this, with the school district and the Outdoor School advocates to really sort of like have a premiere and connect with the schools and and to get kids
That'd
really
be
sort of
awesome.
talking about some of the issues that come up, which are very personal. And I think, you know, the themes of the film are really relatable to, you know, kids and adults. You know, these are real life situations that people go through. And I think that, like, one thing that's really important, I mentioned it earlier, is that, you know, the three of us have these sort of shared lived experiences, but like, we're not the only ones. One of the things that we've been seeing from some of the screens that we have, that, you know, we're touching a lot of people in different ways. You know, it's always incredible to sort of, you know, you work on this film for so long, and then, you know, you're working on it, and you're sort of in it, and you're in the weeds, and then it finally comes time to sort of show the film, and then you get to see other people react to it. And we're really learning and seeing how different people, like, you know, we're not taking notes officially or doing like significant audience testing, but we're really seeing how some of the points in the film that we didn't expect to have emphasis are just really touching people in ways that we never expected. And that's like sort of the power of art that we really, really love. So creating more opportunities for that to happen is really exciting. I think Ime is really sort of really stuck on trying to figure out how to, you know, get the most people to, not necessarily get the most people to see it, but to get people who need to see this film to see the film.
That's so cool. Well, thanks again for making it, and looking forward to seeing it get out there in the world.
Absolutely. No, exciting. I'm glad to see what you guys are doing. I'm excited to see all the other films as well. That's another really cool thing about sort of festivals, is that you get to see so much really great work. So thanks for having this festival and making it what it is.
Very cool. Thanks again, man.